Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on when you may be watching this. Again, I'm Jamie Moeller, and this is the Grad Connection. I want to come to you today with some content. I've been talking a while about this. Part of what I want to do in this channel or in these videos and this content is to talk about what I've been calling the discipline, which is basically a habit-based lifestyle, challenge-based lifestyle, however you want to say it, but in all four areas of life. That is physical, spiritual, relational, and professional. But before I really dive into that content, I actually came across a really good book, and I wanted to share it here, and I'm just realizing that the color of this book is like totally whacked out because of my green screen. But it's called the Coaching Habit, Say Less, Ask More, and Change the Way You Lead Forever. It's by Michael Stanier. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but his last name. I'll put a link up to the book down there. Anyway, this book is about leadership, obviously, about coaching. But it just so happened it had a great chapter today. One of the very first chapters is on habits. And I wanted to relay some of that information because I honestly think for you to be able to live the discipline, and as I reflected on me living out the discipline in my own life, it really took, breaking some old habits, if you want to use that term, and developing new ones. And so I wanted to share some stuff because this book has some really good stuff. I'm also going to include a link. There's like a free PDF, if you will, called 6.5 Habit Gurus. That is on, Stanier has a company called Box of Crayons, which is like a coaching company. I encourage you to look it up and that kind of thing. But there's this free PDF that actually talks and provides a lot of information from several different books, several different authors about really kind of modern information on habits. So I'm going to jump into this real quick and just kind of give you just a little taste of what he talks about. So he has a chapter talking about habits, and one of the very first things he kind of breaks down is this idea that to develop a new habit, you really need 5 things. You need, number 1, a reason. Number 2, you need to know what triggers both old habits and new habits. How to develop a micro habit, so not having a habit or not having an idea of what you're wanting to do that's just kind of amorphous and theoretical. It has to be very applied, very practical, and it should be something that you can do pretty quickly. You have to have effective practice, like repetitive practice, repetition, and then have a plan for when you stumble or things don't go right. And so let me jump back through these. So when we talk about a reason, if you want to change something in your life, if you want to develop a new set of habits, you have to have a reason, and that reason really needs to be beyond you. It needs to be something about serving others and how it connects to others. I'll say for myself, one of the biggest things in starting the discipline was in my physical area of my life. I had exercised none, I was overweight, and all those kinds of things that I've described elsewhere. And I knew that if I didn't do something, I was going to die. Right? Die sooner. And how is that going to serve my wife? How's that going to serve my family? How's that going to serve the people around me? So I had to connect it to serving others. It couldn't just be something for myself, because if it was just for myself, I would have already done it. And so first of all, you need to come up with a reason. And when we start to talk about these disciplines of the physical, the spiritual, the relational, and the professional, and I would encourage not to focus on all of them at once. I'm going to be walking through each of them, but you want to probably just pick one and focus on the one that seems to be the most important to you. For me, it was my health, because my health was degrading, and I knew if I didn't do something quick, I was going to end up having health issues, and then pretty much the other 3 areas are useless, right? If you don't have your health, you can't do anything spiritually, you can't do anything relationally, you certainly can't do anything professionally. So that was where I started, but having a reason, number 1. Second is trigger. So what triggers the old behavior? Mine was just, one of the things that I realized is just not getting up early. Essentially, the way I worked this into my life was actually getting up an hour earlier. And actually, it was probably about an hour and 15 minutes, because it takes me about 15 minutes to kind of get the cobwebs out of my head and to kind of get focused. But generally speaking, that was something that I had to do. The trigger for me is if I sleep in, the likelihood of me doing the disciplines are not going to happen. So I'm probably not going to exercise if I oversleep. Certainly not going to do anything spiritually or any professional reading. And relationally, it just kind of, to me, getting up that extra hour was just, it seems like a very small thing, but it's the trigger that gets me going to do the discipline. At the beginning, was it the trigger? Probably not. It took some working to get that into my life, but essentially, that's now my trigger. I realize if I oversleep or if I sleep in, and when I say sleep in, we're talking like 7:30. All right, that's sleeping in for me. Getting up early is 4:30, 5:30, somewhere in there, right? So figuring out what the trigger is. Next, the micro habit. What do I mean by a micro habit? What can you do in 60 seconds or less? What's short and specific that you can do? For me, it's getting up. So my routine to get me in this mode of doing the discipline is I get up. And for a period of time, I was drinking green smoothies and doing that, and I'll talk a little bit about that at some point. Now it's basically I get up, I have a full 8-ounce glass of water, I take a fistful of vitamins, and if anybody's interested, I suppose we could talk about that too. But I take a fistful of vitamins. Then I usually come into my office and I sit for about 10 minutes just to get the cobwebs out. And then I get and it's actually very simple. When I come into my office, I put on my sneakers and my basically gym socks, and I have these headphones that are laying right here, right? And I put those around my head, and I know that, at a certain time, I'm going to go in and I'm going to get on the treadmill and I'm going to work out. So to me, that's a micro habit. And once I get in there and I get started, the rest of it just happens. And so what can you do in 60 seconds or less to get the habit started? Having effective practice, and a lot of the literature talks about deep practice. Effective practices, there has to be a result of what you're doing. You have to start seeing results. And again, I think this is something that occurs naturally, but effective practice. And then lastly, having a plan. Every one of us is going to stumble. You're going to get off track. You need something that causes some resilience for yourself. And instead of beating yourself up, and I understand willpower is irrelevant. Honestly, willpower will not work. Because if willpower could do it, everybody, when they make all their New Year's resolutions at the first of the year, they wouldn't fall off. They wouldn't fall off of that. They'd stay on it. It's not about willpower. It's not honestly about grit. To me, it's about figuring a way to replace old habits with new habits. Basically, by replacing the old habit with a new habit, you push out the old habits. And so realize that but I will say you have to have a plan, because I guarantee you that at some point you're going to figure out some justification in your mind, in your head, that, well, I'll just sleep in today. Tomorrow I'll get back at it. And then tomorrow comes. I really, yesterday was a very terrible day. And so, I really need to sleep in a little bit and just kind of recover a little bit. I'll get to the next day. And therein lies how a habit is developed. I mean, every one of us, the habits that exist in our life, they are compounding small behaviors that lead us from point A to point B. Oftentimes, we don't see what point B is going to be. But when we get there, we're like, how the heck did I get here? How did this habit, if it's a negative one, how did this habit get me to this point? You could say the same thing about positive habits, right? Positive habits work in the very same way. It's just small compounding things that you do daily that lead you somewhere. So another thing that the literature talks about, and that's in this PDF, and I encourage you again, if you're into leadership, I'd encourage you to buy the book. And it's kind of like a teal, I guess that's like a light blue, and that's why it's kind of messing with my green screen behind me. But so we'll talk about types of triggers. So there are basically 5 types of triggers that the literature talks about. Number 1 is location. A place can trigger you. A time of day, right? A time. So to me, I think that early morning getting up is part of the trigger for me of the positive habit that I have, right? So it's that time factor. Sometimes people might develop bad habits in the afternoon, like drinking too much coffee simply because of the time of day, and they're kind of somewhat tired. Emotional states. So emotional states can be a trigger. A lot of people develop a severe drinking habit when they have negative emotions, right? And it's like a sadness might trigger that, or, but that's an example of a trigger. Other people can be a trigger. I will say that I get easily triggered by other people. And then also a trigger can be based upon what happens right after that trigger, right? So these are examples of triggers. Again, if you look into the 6.5 Habit Gurus document that I referenced, and it's going to be in the links below, this goes into more detail, and there's actually, for each of these kinds of things that we're talking about, I will say Stanier has done it's either Stanier or Stanier, I don't know which, but what I will say is he's done a really good job of weaving in a lot of modern literature, and I kind of like, there's a little bit of edginess in it. A lot of times everybody's probably heard the phrase of, it only takes 21 days to break a habit or develop a habit, and he kind of debunks that, and, that's just, internet folklore, if you will. And I forget what words he uses, but he does it in a really interesting way. But nevertheless, so one of the other things that he reminded me of as I was reading this is a lot of these things that we're going to talk about are simple, but they're not easy. If they were easy, everybody would be doing them. But they are simple. They're pretty easy to understand. And as I talk about habits, it's pretty easy to understand intellectually when we talk about habits and how they develop and all those kinds of things and how to create new habits. It's pretty simple. It doesn't take a whole lot of understanding to understand this. However, to implement it in your life is not easy. And I will say, as we talk about the disciplines in the physical and the spiritual and the relational and the professional, in the areas where you're strong, it's going to be easy. But the areas where you're not strong, it's going to be a challenge. And it's going to be simple. The things, the activities you need to do in those areas. I mean, getting up an hour early to be able to do the disciplines, to spend 15 minutes on a treadmill walking as far as you can walk in that amount of time, breaking it, making sure that you break a sweat, and doing some of these other they're simple things. But it's not easy to get it to develop the habit of doing them and sticking to that habit. So I want to encourage you. You know, he provides some really good advice. Some other points that he makes. First of all, start easy and start small. So I'm encouraging, as we start to talk about these disciplines, and I go through each of them and some of the things that you can do in each of those areas. I want to encourage you to pick whichever is your weakest area. Start there. That's at least a place to start. And start small, right? Don't, if you, like me, not exercising, and I'll be honest with you, when I started exercising, I couldn't walk more than about 5 minutes, and I was drenched in sweat and breathing heavy and wheezing, right? But and for me to think that, I'm going to walk 5 miles, that's ludicrous. So think about when you start in these areas. Start easy, start small, get small accomplishments, and then build on that. I'll tell you, the interesting thing is, my exercise routine basically ballooned from when I started at like 5 minutes on a treadmill to weightlifting and walking around the neighborhood, doing and I never would have thought it possible, but just even walking like 9 to 10 miles in my neighborhood over, in a 2.5-3 hour period. So start easy, start small. Second is and kind of why I wanted to create this group, because I recognize that you're not going to be able to develop these things on your own. Because if you could, you would have already done it. It would have already happened. You need to buddy up. You need to find someone that you can connect with, that can hold you accountable, that can say, how you doing in this stuff? What are you struggling with? How can I help you? How can I spur you to go further in these disciplines? But you have to have some kind of relationship. Maybe that's another graduate student that's close to you, and the two of you want to do this together. Maybe it's this group. That's why I'm wanting to create kind of the Facebook group. And I know it's kind of contrived, and it's not the same as like physical presence and all those kinds of things. Eventually, I would like to do some live Zoom kinds of things and just open up the door and see who shows up, and where we can talk about some of these things. But this is kind of the start of it. But you have to have somebody, right, to help you want to do this, to kind of keep you. You just need to buddy up. And then lastly is be resilient, because you will fail. There are days that I have, and I actually, back in September, this is February of 21, in September of 20, I damaged my arm pulling on a rope on a boat, a large houseboat. And I basically messed it up, and it has taken until now for it to actually stop hurting, and now I'm almost 50 years old, and so things heal slower and blah, blah, blah. But, I've continued to walk and exercise that, but I haven't weightlifted, right? And so my intent is to, as part of my commitment in this is I want to get back to doing some of the weightlifting things that I did. Because honestly, as it relates to exercise, cardio will help you burn calories. It will not shift your body composition. It will not move the fat from your stomach or wherever it happens to be. It's not going to cause you to get rid of that. It may get rid of some of it, but it's actually going to be weightlifting that's going to change the composition of your body. Weightlifting is what's going to cause you to lose fat in certain places by focused exercises in those places. Just walking and cardio and running, you'll lose weight overall simply because you're going to be in a calorie deficit if you're watching what you're taking on the intake, right? But it's extra. So that's why I want to get back to weightlifting, because I started to be able to see the difference that it was making in my arms and my legs and just overall. So I would highly encourage, when we talk about physical exercise, that's one of the things we're going to talk about is, what should it look like and how should you go about it? And I'm going to share what I know, and hopefully you all can share some of what you know too. But anyway, being resilient is where I was going with that. Having a plan, knowing that you probably will fail. In other words, there are going to be times that you don't do whatever it is, and you don't beat yourself up about it. You forgive yourself and you move on. Because if you beat yourself up on it and you just you get into this cycle where you just spin down, and it's basically self-defeating. Just realize you're going to fail, right? We all miss it, and all you have to do is basically, when you miss it, get back on it. And that's kind of what my target is in March 1st, which is coming up here. My intent is to get back to weightlifting, and kind of I know I'll probably have to nurse the arm a little bit and be gentle with it, but that's my intent. So anyway. So habits continue because of rewards. This is something that he talks about in the book. Habits continue because of rewards. So one of the very first things, I think, not only getting clear on your reason, but also getting clear in your mind. And you may even want to write it down in a journal. Journaling is another thing that we're going to talk about that I think is incredibly important. But you may want to write down what you envision the reward being. If it's exercise, basically, maybe it's losing weight, maybe it's being able to do things that you couldn't do before, or being able to do them in a better way. But nevertheless, get clear on that reward. And lastly, I just say pick one place to start, right? Pick one place to start. So I wanted to come to you today, and I'm not sure how long this video is going to be. I guess it's about 15, 20 minutes here. Anyway. So I wanted to bring some content, right? I've talked about this lifestyle. So essentially, the snippets that I bring are going to be kind of like this. Today, it was just kind of apropos that I was reading this book. I actually just bought it because I saw that it was highly ranked on Amazon, and I like to read a lot of like leadership kinds of materials. And it just so happened it had a chapter on habits, which seems appropriate before we start talking about the disciplines and the physical, the spiritual, the relational, the professional. We need to talk about how do you develop new habits in those areas. So I would encourage you, take the next week or so, dive into some of the literature, at least download this, and it's free, the 6.5 Habit Gurus PDF. You may want to buy his book. You may want to buy some of the other books that he references, but start diving into this literature. Start diving into this, because you're going to have to develop new habits if this is going to stick, if you're going to make this work. So with that, I want to wish you a happy rest of your day. I hope it does look like spring is starting to come here in Indiana, which is kind of nice. It's warmed up a little bit. We're getting rid of some of the snow. But I do wish and hope that you stay healthy, you stay safe, and that this material starts to be something that you can integrate into your life. If you just sit back and you listen to this stuff, you're missing the mark, right? If you don't actually take what I'm talking about and put it to practice, it just becomes head knowledge. And eventually it all just gets mushy and it doesn't mean anything, right? If you don't find a way to apply this. So I'd encourage you. And if there's something that I can do to encourage you in that, let me know. I'm willing to do one-on-ones. Haven't had anybody reach out on that, but to talk about those kinds of things. But again, we're just seeing where this is going, and I hope it's helpful to you. So have a great day. Thanks.